Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with a question for you.
Okay.
So I know obviously that you are a musician, but I know that you also were a really big reader. And I know from reading your book that Jane Eyre is one of the ones that you love. I think you've got that Gothic streak, right?
Yeah.
Jane Eyre, there's a name check for Mrs. Danvers. Yeah,
yes.
from Rebecca.
Yeah, you're right.
So what did you start with? Like, were those influences in your head right away? Or was it little elements, or what do you think?
You nailed it. Like I when I was sort of dreaming of the idea of writing a novel, I revisited Jane Eyre and Rebecca, the Daphne du Maurier book, repeatedly. I went back to, in particular, Jane Eyre, but I thought that there was a little bit of, there were some similar themes that I found, and they both have this sort of Gothic setting that I used Oxford to sort of stand in for that in This Bird Has Flown. But yeah, I loved how fierce the Jane Eyre character was, and though, obviously a book that was written much is not set in a modern, for its time it was, but I wanted to write a very, current book. Even I remember during COVID that we have the same literary agent that I said to Sarah Burns, our agent, oh my God, there's so much canoodling and kissing and touching, and do I have to how will people be wearing masks on the plane? Because I knew that I had written this scene about my character Jane Start meeting a stranger on a plane and falling in love with him, and so that was so interesting. It's just, I don't know why that came into my mind. I've never actually talked about that, but I had a moment there where this book won't work if I'm trying to make it set in the actual moment that COVID was happening. But those books, Jane Eyre was really important in particular.
I love Jane Eyre. Of all the Brontes, that's my favorite one.
Me too.
But it's one of those books that when you try to explain, I have a 12-year-old, and I'll try to explain, why Mr. Rochester is a problem. I'm like, well, he's really wonderful, but he imprisoned his wife a little bit.
Yeah.
She's sort of up there sometimes,
I know. There's even a line in my book where Jane says, oh, he's like Rochester, except he's not arrogant and twice my age and rich.
Yeah.
So,
but otherwise just like him.
Those three elements for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what was your process like with writing? Like, did you start with a whole idea? Did you just start with a moment?
I
just start the moment on the plane?
One day I just kind of started. I think that I don't even, I'd have to look back a gajillion drafts back, but I didn't, the opening of the book was vastly different. And the the first day that I sat down when my kid Jackson said, Mom, stop talking about this so-called book you're going to write and just start. And he even said, tomorrow morning, you're going to open your laptop and you're going to look at a blank page and you're going to start. And so it didn't start exactly as the book now does, but it got me going. And at first I thought, well, I think that the protagonist should be someone involved in the entertainment business. But the more I thought about it, I thought, I know what it's like to be a musician. And so maybe I will be able to craft this character and be able to give her some things that I may not know enough about, what it's like to be an actor. But I thought that she would be a performer.
Were you tempted to avoid music in the feeling of I just want to do something different. I don't want to rely on that. Because I think sometimes we do that as writers, where you're like, I don't want to go back to the same old thing. I want to show that I can do something wildly different.
Well, that's, I think, why that very first initial instinct was to maybe potentially make her someone in the movie business. But then I realized I did have this opportunity to kind of pull back the curtain on what it feels like the tangible moments, the stage fright. That people sometimes don't realize, at least for me, what that experience is like and how one has to really find some coping mechanism for allowing themselves to actually open their mouth and have a sound come out when they're feeling like their whole body is screaming, no, don't do it. And then you have to find your voice somehow. So those were things that during the years of writing the book, I found my way into being able to describe.
Yeah, I feel like that the little details that you know from experience or that you get because you talk to somebody are they make all the difference.
Yeah.
So like I'm just thinking about like the way you write about music is so wonderful. Like you can tell it's like a musician's way of talking about it, and it's really clear. And when I was doing research, one of the best little details that I got was I asked a friend of mine who was in wine importing, because my book is
Right.
about these two women who are working in the wine importing business. And she had left it, and I said, "Do you ever want to go back to it? Do you ever miss it?" And she was like, "I do miss it. I think about it." And I said, "What keeps you from going back?" And I thought she'd say like, my kids or, all the travel or whatever. She's like, "My teeth. I'm really worried about my teeth." And there's a whole thing in the book where before they go, before they go on their trip, their boss is like, "Everybody start your Sensodyne like 3 weeks in advance." And that was a real detail. And I just love those details like you would not know.
Yeah, I learned so
yeah.
much about them spitting so much wine into
Yes.
cups and their teeth turning brown or red or whatever.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff.
Yeah, I did a little like research trip where I only went to like maybe 6 wineries, so it was nothing compared, but I got like a little taste of that, and that was the only thing that let me know like this is why you spit when you drink wine, because it feels so wrong. You're just like, who takes this beautiful thing that somebody has made and you spit it out like an animal? Like I just couldn't do it. But then by the time you're on your like 6th or 7th taste of Syrah, you're like, oh, got it. Okay.
And you're just sitting with your friends spitting into the thing.
Yeah, I mean, and you feel very weird about it. Yeah, you're just sort of
like, you never get over that?
I mean, I think they do.
They do.
But in my day, I did not get over it.
I didn't realize how much spitting was involved.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's one of the great things that I learned about your book.
So much
An
spitting.
insider's look.
Yeah. Well, you realize like they're drinking like what 25, 30 wines a day on these trips. Like they're just tasting and tasting and tasting. So even with spitting, you are getting something. Like.
And in your book, I realized there is a point for some, at least the characters in your book, where they do realize, oh shit, I'm like wasted.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just totally wasted.
Yeah.
And how do you do that for a living and not cross that line and feel like terrible and that unwell from how much
they do.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that like I didn't really want to write about alcoholism, but everybody who I would talk to, I would say like, so tell me like, what are the problems in the wine business? What are the great things? How do you know you've been successful? Whatever. And they just kept bringing up drinking problems. And because it's like, and I think I had this very naive sense that like, oh, I'm sure they've got it handled, right? That if you go into this world, you have a way to deal with it. You're very careful, forgetting that like, because I got interested in this world because of the restaurant business, where people go into the restaurant business and they stay in it because they're comfortable staying up late, doing a ton of drinking. I didn't get into this, but I have heard a lot of people talk about doing a ton of Coke, not to do Coke, but to be able to keep drinking wine.
Right.
And I was like, I'm not even going to get into it.
Reminiscent of the rock and roll.
Right? I think it's as if we are the same person, is what you're saying.
I think so.
Yeah.
No, but the same, what do you call it? Job. There's an expression like it comes with the territory of the job. I can't get the wording right now.
Yeah, but those random
occupational hazards.
Yes.
There it is. Yeah. Occupational hazard of the job would be certainly in the wine business, but certainly also in the rock and roll business.
So what were the
sex, drugs, and rock and roll?
What were the occupational hazards that you found in common between the music business and the writing business?
Oh, the music business and the writing business. The writing business is so good. I can't compare. The writing business, I mean, okay, there's some aspect of being in particular in a band and trying to make art by committee, for lack of a better way of saying it. So it is kind of a dysfunctional family. I would say all bands, they love each other, and they also, I don't want to say it, they hate each other, but it's like families. It's like sibling rivalries. And actually in the Bangles, the drummer and the lead guitarist are sisters. So we had that built-in dynamic. So everybody seemed to have their own like unique way that the puzzle pieces would work together. Like it is like a family. So just like families, just like siblings.
I've thought about
work through those things.
But you don't have to when you're writing. You can just be like, I don't have to run this by anybody.
No,
I can just do this.
That was the great part.
Yeah.
That was so fun about it. It was such a solo experience. So I loved that. And I would just, Jay would come home, my husband would come home like after a long day, and I'd still be in my pajamas, still sitting at the kitchen table, and he'd be like, "Wait, I left 8 hours ago, and you're still there," and I'd be like, "This is so much fun," and he'd say, How could it possibly be fun? And I just said, just read my book one day. And you'll see I'm having so much fun with these characters, writing about love and sex and rock and roll, all good things to write about.
Right. Yeah. What's more fun?
I know.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of anything. Gosh, that just reminded me of something, and now I don't remember what it was. So
Okay.
I know what it was. I was going to ask, when did your husband read your book?
He read a draft probably like I've been already at it for probably a year and a half before I let anybody really read it.
Yeah.
And then over the course of time, during the whole journey of it, probably another couple of times, or I would show him stuff every once in a while. But he wasn't. I was very alone in the process up until a point. Margie, who's a great novelist, also. I mean, not also, but like she is, and she is a wonderful novelist, was one of the first people I let pry the manuscript from my grip, because I never felt it was good enough to show anybody.
Yeah.
And then she read it, and she sent me a text message that I've saved forever and will have forever, of her response. And she said, like, get thee to a nunnery version of that, get thee to to an agent. I don't know anybody in the book world, and she's like, well, my agent's pretty good, and we have the same agent.
Your agent is pretty good. Yeah.
And she came from editing, and she's a genius.
Yeah.
Sarah Burns.
Yes, she is wonderful. How was it being edited for you? I mean, I guess like if you were used to writing music with people, and so therefore you're accustomed to having to like take feedback and make a do that sort of thing. So did you find it difficult to get editing feedback, or were you like, no, it's cool?
I really liked it. Every once in a while I'd push back and go, no, I can't lose this. But absolutely, you're so alone, you know, when you're working on the novel. It really is weeks, months, years. It's like The Shining. Except you're not writing that same sentence over and over and over again. But there is an aspect to it. At a certain point, your characters are talking to you all day long in your head, and you're like, wait, I'm not psychotic. I don't need to be medicated, do I? No.
Yeah, not yet.
They're talking to me, and I just have to write. I would text myself, you've gone through everyone who's written probably I'm repeating things but I didn't know any of this until I did it. Yeah. I didn't know.
But I don't know, there's that lovely moment, like when you're still, for me, it always takes a while to be sure that I have a thing I'm going to be committed to, because like at some point in the beginning, you're like, I'm going to write a little of this, and you're not sure if it will really last. Yeah. And you're just kind of trying it.
Try out an idea.
Yeah. Or I'm just not sure if it's got enough. I just don't feel committed to it. So I'm like, well, I'm still working on it. I'm still trying, but I don't know if I'm going to be in for the long haul yet.
Got it.
But then there's that point when you're like, I'm in for the long haul, and now I love it. And you'll just be like sitting there, like, in bed trying to go to sleep and just thinking about how great it is. Yeah.
I just got an idea.
Yeah.
Damn it.
But then, of course, then you bring it into the world and you're like, oh, right. That's right. When I was just lying there in bed thinking how wonderful I am, like that might not take us through, but it'll get you through the first, years or whatever writing alone.
It doesn't let you go. I found the ideas and actually that was really a fun part of it when I would just constantly get it. I'd lay my head on the pillow and then I'd get an idea and I'd have to write it. And then I would dream about the book. I would dream this crazy version of the book and wake up and go, what was that? Yeah. Like,
did any of it ever make it in?
I don't know, but I just wake up like I couldn't. It just was part of me. It was like the alien in when Sigourney Weaver or whatever in that one gets in your body and it just takes over your whole being. It kind of was like that at points, but not in a bad way. Yeah, I kind of loved it.
So now that I know you don't want to, you're kind of working on something new, but like, are you more of a reviser or are you more of a drafter? We were talking about this just before because I am better at revising.
I'm kind of a reviser.
Okay.
I don't want to admit to that, but
Why?
I can get really like obsessed with revising. what I really need to do right now on this new venture is kind of like try to figure out where it's going. But I kind of live inside the characters, so they don't know what's the future brings. It's not like a Twilight Zone episode or something where someone has a magical ability to project. So I'm kind of like stumbling my way through like I did with the first book. But I think I want to buckle down and kind of arc it out a little bit more.
In the beginning, you don't know what that arc will be. You know, like you just have to get to know them.
Has to happen. Lots of
you just got to like walk around. And I wish somebody had taught me that earlier. It took me like a really long time before I understood anything about how to like come up with a story generating situation. And as a result, like I'd write all of those scenes where people would be like, what happens in this scene? I'd be like, oh, so many things. And people would be like, nothing happened in that scene. Like, okay, fine. So you end up cutting a whole lot. But I was really relieved when I heard somebody say that most writers are either drafters or revisers, because I find the first draft so difficult that I was like, oh, thank God. Because maybe I just am not good at this, you know, and if you're not good at writing, should you just stop? And
you're very good at writing.
Well, but if you can't do the thing, the primary writing. And so when somebody said, no, you just like revising better, I was like, oh, that's it. Like this part is always hard for me.
Yeah, I like
revising. There's something about no matter how sort of misshapen or weird or messy the draft is, if I can feel like it has edges, then I think about it differently.
Yes.
And then I'm able to start doing something.
That's good. I'm still trying to figure out like I'm trying with this one to have a sort of a better sense, or put my energy towards really figuring out what happens.
Yeah. Were there any difficult like topics for you? You were talking about like the things that were really fun to write about were of course like, you know, sex and rock and roll and the travel. Was there anything you were like, no, I don't want to write about that, but people keep telling me I have to write about that?
Oh, let me think. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't remember like a specific one.
Of course, if you asked me that, I couldn't answer it either. So it's
a tricky one.
Yeah.
I think there was sort of that mucky middle part of my book where I was like, it felt episodic, and I was sort of writing in an episodic way, and I had to grapple with that and sort of weave everything through and kind of tighten it. And so that was something that I think that the sort of first act and third act, it kind of, but then things would surprise me. I did some 11th hour, like, oh man, running to my computer and doing like a sudden last minute revelation before I sent it to Helen O'Hare, who was my editor by then at Little Brown. And so there were some exciting, dramatic moments in the process.
What were some of the surprises?
Well, I was sort of working on the very third act. I had you read my book and gave me a great note. I removed a whole thing in Paris. I don't know if you remember giving me this note.
I might. I sometimes I just go swashbuckling around telling people to cut things.
And moped trying to get to the theater.
It's sounding familiar now. Okay.
Yes. You were like, get rid of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to give away things in the book, but
something
you actually said, and I was like, okay, yeah, all right.
Okay.
That's a good note.
Yeah.
Let me see what else I can do.
Cutting is really satisfying.
It's very satisfying.
Yeah, I love to do it.
Yeah, but so I had an 11th hour thing. I don't want to give too many things away in terms of the plot for people who haven't read it but want to. But yeah, Jay just pointed out that I'd done a repeat of something and that it would be, maybe I could think about it differently. And it was a great note.
Okay.
And so I did a last minute revision there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is really, it's such a lonely process. You know, you sit on wherever you work and you just disappear into your fantasy life, and the words are coming out, and you're, whether you're revising or you're creating on the spot, but there's something very pleasurable and transporting about it. I found a whole way of life that I love. I'm like addicted to it now. I'm scared to write a new book, being honest, but I've already, started. So, but there's something so pleasurable, even though it's hard.
Yeah. It's like, I don't think people write for the publishing, they write for the writing.
Yeah.
You know, even though we like will complain about it all the time, you know, and just be like,
That's
I can't believe I have to do this thing.
wise.
But when you're happy with something or you're interested in something, you just walk around thinking about it all the
Yeah.
time, and it's really fun.
It's really such a great
Yeah.
obsession.
Yeah.
It's like a good obsession
Yeah. Most of the time.
most of the
Yeah.
time.
Other times it might be a bad obsession.
What would be an
But-
example of that?
I'm trying to think. I feel like I must have had them before where you're just, I think I've seen writers, and I've done this, like where you just sort of get lost in it and you can't get
Yeah.
you can't get distance, you can't walk away from it.
Yeah.
And so you just get in there all the time and you're like, I've got to fix it, but you don't know how. And so you
Right.
just are
That's true.
making it different, but not better.
Yeah.
I've
yeah,
had people tell me that. They're like, it's changing, but it's not improving.
yeah,
You know,
that's a realistic experience. Yeah, I had that happen as well on this. But that's how you learn, I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah. So what's your relationship between reading and writing? Is there anything you like to read while you're writing or don't want to read while
There's
you're?
things I like to read. There's things that I go back to, my
Mhm.
my special books that just I never tire of,
Mhm.
like being entranced by the prose.
Yeah.
You know.
Which ones?
Well, weird. I don't know if it's weird, but I'm very obsessed with a couple of John Updike books.
Which one?
That one is called Couples. It's like my favorite.
How did we not talk about this?
It is.
Sorry,
it
I've been
is
going around talking about
probably
couples for like the longest time,
Are you
and nobody
kidding?
else ever was like into it with
I'm
me.
That's weird.
totally
Yes, I know you're like,
obsessed with
that's
it.
messed up. Yeah.
And so that is the book that, like, in the way that Jane Eyre had a big
Yeah.
effect on This Bird Has Flown.
Mm-hmm.
The book that this related characters from This Bird Has Flown. It's kind of, I don't want to call it a sequel, but it's a
Yeah.
related book. Couples is this book that I just insanely obsessed with.
Yes.
And I just cannot get over the prose. It's
Mhm.
like when you read Nabokov or you
Mhm.
read like F. Scott Fitzgerald or something.
Mhm.
Like it's so lilting, and it's got so much alliteration that I love, and
Yeah.
inner rhymes that he sneaks in. He's a very juicy writer, very
Mhm.
sensual writer,
Mhm.
and I love how dirty and his books are.
Yep.
I love adult, you know. I love the themes.
Yeah.
I love how dark it gets.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to go really dark, but he's writing in the third person,
Mhm.
so he can say shit about people,
Mhm.
and it's like, okay, he's got that distance.
Yeah.
I tend to gravitate towards the
Mhm.
first person, so it's I have to,
Yeah.
I don't want the voice of whoever the character is just seems too cruel or mean, but
Mhm.
Updike just goes for it.
I
He's
love
like-
that close third, because you can have
Yeah.
the narrative
I
kind of point of
should
view.
probably
But
try that.
so for anybody, by the way, who, if you haven't read Couples, well, I think it was like written in like the 60s. It
Yeah,
takes place right
67.
around.
It was his
Okay.
best-selling book.
Oh, was it? Okay,
Yeah,
because
but
it
it
has so
wasn't
much
the one-
sex in it, so much more sex than usual.
Constant.
Yes, constant, because it's about
So good.
like these 4 or 5 couples in Tarbox, Maine. I think it's
Yes,
Maine,
Starbucks.
and just following, and also it's
No, it's in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Thank you. Of course, yeah, he's not going as far as Maine. It's, yeah,
He's
so
writing about a
yeah, he's
writing
kind of
about what
right
he
about the whole
knows.
them. But I read Couples at like 15 or 16, and it's about all these couples who were like having these, rabid affairs with one
Yeah,
another. And I remember I grew up in like the suburbs of Ohio, and looking at my parents and being like, so that's how it is. And later my mom was like, no, we were playing volleyball. Like it absolutely
Yeah,
was
yeah,
not
yeah.
like that. But the writing is so incredible.
It's
And
insane,
there's
right?
this one moment when all the physicality too. He introduces 8 people in like one page.
Yeah.
You know exactly who everybody is.
Yeah.
You can see everybody clear as a bell. It's like a tour de force in that
It's a
way.
tour de force.
And there's a beautiful moment that I never forgot of when he is describing this woman is started this big affair, and he describes
Foxy.
yes,
Foxy
it's
and
Foxy,
Pete.
Foxy and Pete,
P-I-E-T.
that she
He's a
she
Dutch
feels
man.
something as a tearing of veils inside
Oh,
her.
yeah.
And I,
I
was
mean,
just like,
yeah,
hats off.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Oh,
It's like such a debauched, awesome book,
yeah.
but it's so good.
You
And
should
the
all go read it.
writing is like, it is like F. Scott Fitzgerald or Nabokov. It's like so lyric and
Mhm.
just gorgeous.
Yeah. I'm very excited. I've never come across anybody else who cared about the book the way I do. So this is just my revelation.
I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll stop talking about. We should talk about our books, but we're like,
Yeah.
let's just talk about couples. That's what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's see, what else? What do people not ask you about your book that you're like, I wish somebody would ask me about
Nobody
that?
ever asked me about what you. That
Oh.
I mean, I've never been able to bring up my Margie's knows my
Mhm.
updike obsession. My friends know about it, but I've never spoken of it. But
Okay.
I'm glad that you're
Yeah.
an updike fan. What did people? Wait, what was your question? What
Now I don't
do
remember.
people not
Oh,
ask me?
yeah. Well, is there anything like, I feel like a lot of times we have that question that we're like, oh, I wish somebody would ask me that. And in this case, I think like everything people have asked me, I'm like, no, those are all the things I want to talk about. But
Yeah,
I'm often curious to know if there's one thing that people are like, why does that not come up?
I don't know, Margie. Have I ever
Yeah.
mentioned the thing that I want to be asked about, but I don't?
No, no. I think you've loved being known for your brain.
Oh,
And I think that
that's nice.
yeah, but I think
I do love being known for my brain.
right?
Yeah.
Like it's a different. I think you've liked this different connection to this. You are such a
Thank
storyteller.
you.
And
Now
I think
that's true.
right. This has been fun for you to like talk books.
Yeah, because I think because of the Bangles and the 80s and just sort of getting cemented as one does from the thing that I guess people first heard about you. It has been really fun to sort of let people know that there's this whole other life of like a book obsessed human and how much I love to read and how thrilled I get from reading great books and then to actually get to write one and to be here with you guys and like it's all real.
Yeah.
It's happened and it's a new chapter.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Well, and so many of us are like, I want to write the book, and you start to write the book, but you don't finish the book, and you don't publish the book. So that's like, it's really gratifying to have been like, this wasn't just a thing that I was interested in, but you actually did the work, which never stops being crazy.
I didn't expect. I mean, there was this one moment where I just was on. It's called X now, but it was Twitter, and I just see this. New York Times has written a review of my book, and I was like, and I started to walk up towards Jay's upstairs. I was downstairs to where my husband's like little home office is, reading it while I'm going upstairs, blindly reading it, and I'm going, oh my God, this is
it was a rave. If you guys
was
didn't
really
read it.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he's like, what? I was literally like, I don't know. I was just shocked. And I said, just read it. And it was this incredibly beautifully written review though. Like she's a novelist. And I actually reached out. I didn't know it was cool. I waited like 3 months to reach out to her but she couldn't have been Beatrice Williams. And I don't know, that was the craziest thing.
Yeah.
I called Margie. She came running over. We called Sarah, our agent, all three of us. And it was just this thing. Like you sit there and you dream your whole life of writing a novel, and then you sit down and you do it, and then you're so lucky that you get Sarah to be your agent, and then Little Brown to be your publisher, and then you get that. And I was just like, I just didn't think anyone would. I was worried that people would just dismiss me. How dare she? She was a rock and roll chick. What's she doing?
Yeah.
So it was really nice. It was really nice that, like, I'm no spring chicken. I mean, I'm 64 now. So it was kind of nice. I wondered if they were just being nice, but no, that review changed my life.
Yeah.
Really did.
Yeah. And I was going to say, usually people aren't trying to be that nice. You know what I mean? They're like, they're not necessarily like cruel or anything, but people just, if you're going to write that review, you really believe it.
She just really connected with it.
Yeah.
So I felt like, wow, this is this bodes well for me to maybe try another book down the line. So keep going.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like I have many more questions. I'm sure there's more that we can talk about, but should we take a moment and see if people have questions here?
But we haven't talked enough about your book.
Oh, well, hit me.
Well, have you guys had a chance to read Michelle's incredible book? Maybe not yet. You just put it out.
Yeah.
So Michelle I got to know Michelle because we got put together through our editor, and I really needed someone to read my book. And I had read which one? There was a book you wrote that now I'm just like a really famous book that you wrote that I'm just literally having on my.
Maybe You're Not You.
I think so.
Yeah.
But when I read your new book about wine, even though I don't drink anymore, it made me want to. But
I know. I'm always a little worried about that.
I'm not going to. But your prose. Now I know you're an Updike fan, but your prose, Michelle's prose, is so sumptuous and delicious and gorgeous. So it's just like this unfurling, beautiful poem. And so it's just a delight to read your book.
Thank you. I do love, I like writing about a real physical world. I think we probably share that in common, that like, I don't want to write these like spindly, like novels in the air and, who can say what's really happening? I'm like, no, I want to be in a body, like experiencing the things that a body experiences for good or ill. I want a full world. And, writing about the wine world was a great way to do that because it's, your big excuse to be like, oh, let's write about, if you're writing about wine importers, you got to travel, and then when you travel, you're going to go eat a lot of amazing food. And so that was great fun.
Just the way that you, your skill at writing characters and dialogue and friendships when they're good and when they're bad, and there's one, there's one really sexy passage with the doctor.
Yeah.
That is like, I read it like 4 times in a row. I was like, this is so beautiful.
Thank you.
And hot, very hot, but also extremely beautiful language.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I'm in awe of your writing. It's gorgeous.
Thank you. I love that. The weird feeling you have, and you might have experienced some of this too, where like you go into the world, like you go see like your extended family. And I remember like after I published my first book, which had a couple of sex scenes in it, and seeing my aunt Claire, she was like, I read your book. And I was like, and you can tell we're thinking about page 39, aren't we? Like, we're not going to talk about it. Let's never speak of it. But like, I don't know if you have that feeling of sometimes you're like sometimes I don't mind. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm going to write about that. And then other times you find yourself like talking to somebody where it feels weird. You're like, I don't want to talk about it.
One of the first readers on my book was my husband's my mother-in-law. So she's like an evangelical Christian. I was raised in an atheist Jewish family, but so very different background from my growing up experience. But she was one of my first readers before Margie, and it was this big fat manuscript. And she's in a wheelchair. She's had a lot of health issues, but we would all be hanging out. She was spending a lot of time with us at this one point that I'm remembering, and she'd sort of drift off and go, I'm going to go read some more of Sue's book. And she'd wheel herself into the guest room. And I'm saying to Jay, like, wow, there's a lot of sex scenes and things in the book.
Yeah.
And your mom is, and he's like,
yeah,
she's enjoying it.
Yeah, she seems to be having a good time.
So later, right when she's heading back to Colorado where she lives, I said, well, I'm so happy you enjoyed my book. She goes, oh, I loved it. And then I said, what do you read normally? Who are your authors? And now I'm going to forget all these famous romance writers, like Danielle Steele.
Yeah.
She said something like, well, I love Danielle Steele. Yeah. And I said, oh, and then I got it. Then I got it.
The big romance.
She was carried away. She was swept up in all the sexy fun stuff.
I also have evangelical Christian in-laws who they're careful in what they talk about with my writing. They'll just be like, they're super supportive.
Yeah.
But nobody is ever just like, oh, I noticed you write about that, Michelle. And I was like, let's not. Yeah.
Jay's mom seemed to like it. The only thing that she reported when she had my book in her book group was the F word. She doesn't like that.
Yeah.
So, and I get it. I get that. But she's good with all the sex stuff.
Good. Nice. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Anybody else have it? Yeah.
Margie?
Oh, sorry.
Just this last conversation you're having about kind of your fantasy worlds or the more interior worlds of your own minds meeting the page, and other people experiencing those stories, but they are extensions of you. These came from you, they are your descendants. Did it change the context of how you were in relationship with people at large, to say nothing of people you had intimate relationships with too?
I mean, because it is all the characters are you, or some aspect of you, or the thing that you wish you were, or whatever that might be. And I think, I don't know that the big thing that I notice about just trying to serve that other little inner world and trying to just be a person walking around in the world is, sometimes I've had to learn the hard way that eventually people might read what you wrote. So you can't just be a vulture like I want to be and take from everybody's world and just be like, ooh, that's an interesting story. I'll take that and I'll use that. And I have done that. And sometimes people don't really like that. And so you do, like in writing classes, people will be like, oh, you write as though everybody, all your family's dead. But I'll end up saying to my students, like, but you live in the world. And if you are going to write something really tough, you might as well know that this could be tricky. So it ends up being a little bit, you both find the world much more interesting when you're just alert to all the interesting stuff in it. But you do have to pay attention to how you repurpose all of that stuff. Because there's some good stuff out there that I'm like, I'm not going to write it, even though I really want to. How about you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You can take those things and you can, like you said, kind of repurpose them or disguise them a little bit, if you like. It's just a funny process when you start writing, the things that leap into your brain. And it's very exciting. I know that when I was writing This Bird Is Flown, I had so much fun writing the characters I loved to hate. Like, not actual hate, but I loved Freddie, for example, Freddie Lovejoy, who's this very posh Oxford, dandy, who's got terrible morals, and I just loved writing him.
Yeah.
And I loved writing the complicated characters that I don't know. I love those characters that were fraught and messed up and dysfunctional.
Yeah.
I loved writing about the dysfunctional characters.
They are much more fun to write.
They're so fun to write.
Yeah, like and Margot Livesey wrote about how every writer should write about an annoying character. Because a villain, right, is like, that's really big, that's huge. But the nature of annoyance is precise and specific. And so it makes you observe all those little things, which is indeed great fun. So those of you guys who are writers, go write about annoying people.
Yeah.
And it's extremely enjoyable.
When I realized that Tom, the male, I guess the love interest, had a housekeeper that suddenly showed up. It was like from Bulgaria, very, very grim person, but ultimately, I loved her. I love Mrs. T, Mrs. Taranichenko. I loved her. I loved writing her. She was somebody who was like Jane's sort of nemesis at first. Yeah. But and I loved writing Freddie. I loved writing all the like very idiosyncratic characters, the B characters,
Yeah, they're great fun.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. I'd say also you're very transgressive. You love that. Like you love to find someone who will
be terrible.
Lay it out.
Yeah, lay it out. Yeah.
Like so you have probably a slightly different relationship to truth telling in a novel because you love truth telling. You adore it. It's sort of your thing.
Well, also I love that Jane had to process all of that. And it's a fish out of water story. So she's having to grapple with all these posh academics in Oxford and how does she fit in. So she always feels like she's a walking faux pas.
But the question I have is, I watched Sue fall like deeply in love with her love interest, like, deeply, and I remember
Tom,
and I remember you like not wanting to like punish Tom the way he needed to be punished.
I know he was so hard. I protected him.
You protected him.
Time. I protected him.
I know, and I would say my boyfriend, who's a writer, was also like, I don't want any bad things to happen to anyone I'm writing about. But there's other writers who say your job, you you find your characters have been chased into a tree, and your job, you want to save them, but your job is to light the tree on fire.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great.
Right? But like, so I'm just curious about like finding the distance to actually like to be in love with what you're making, but also destroy all the little lives of the people you're making as needed. Like,
Yeah.
when you become too attached, and how do you find your way through that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I successfully.
You did.
I did? Okay. That's good. I don't know. That was a hard thing because I really wanted to protect Tom through it. Even though I knew that the story, like in a Jane Eyre story, it's about the ghosts of our past haunting our chances to find true love. And, you know, I know that he had a lot of ghosts, and I just had to be really mindful of walking that line of like, and he's kind of mysterious. He's like a person who's kind of like very, even though he's a professor of literature, he's a man of few words, and he's very humble and kind of quiet. His quietness is kind of his superpower. He just has this thing, at least for her. So I don't know. It was hard. It was hard because I felt like you're living in the world of your characters. It's like child's play, but grown up version of it. It's you start to really kind of get attached, and it's hard. It was hard to make him bad
But you have to, or you lose your reader's faith,
I know.
right? Because what I remember is that there's some stuff that he does or chooses not to do.
Oh, in
That
the book?
that if you
you were
if you
hard
don't
on him.
say
I was
it,
protecting
yeah.
him. I was
But
always wanting to.
if
No,
you
but that's
don't, right? But if
important.
you don't, like at some point
Yeah.
have the book acknowledge when
Yeah.
somebody is behaving badly. I'm all for the characters behaving badly. It's much more interesting.
Yeah.
But then the reader you start to lose them because they're just sort of like, why is no one ever going to talk about the fact that this person is behaving,
Yeah.
and so, because I mean, fiction requires you to be kind of a torturer. And we don't have to be totally horrible to them. We don't have to like make their lives miserable, but you
Yeah.
have to make things difficult or else they won't do anything,
Yeah.
So I like a character to behave poorly, but then,
Yes.
and now I'm better about it when somebody will be like, that character, I didn't like them. I'm like, okay, fine, you didn't like them.
Well, Updike's the master of everyone.
Oh, yeah, they're all
behaving
terrible.
So wretchedly.
Yeah, but so sexily.
And perversely.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
This is kind of in that process category of questions, and around that conflict, it sounds like you're not at the outset. You haven't really decided what that conflict is and what will happen to those characters. It sort of is the comeuppance, and you let it play out, and then decide how that happens, or did you have an idea going into it? This is the core of the conflict. I just need to figure out how that is.
I wish I did. I wish I did, but I stumbled my way through. But then again, this is my first book. So I think I'll be a little bit more organized in that regard, like figuring out stuff in advance. But I really kind of stumbled my way through This Bird Has Flown.
I don't know how, I mean, sometimes you figure it out in advance, but usually you just have to know something about this character and what is bothering them, what causes the most trouble for them in life. And then you make that thing happen for them. So for me, I have these two characters, and one is, her name is Wren, and she has sort of clawed her way into the wine business from outside. She doesn't come from money. She doesn't come from people taking her to Europe or anything like that. And so what I was trying to think of, I felt like she needed another character. And it's like, well, what's going to make this character the most unsettled? And it's going to be the girl who was born right into that and who is completely at home in that world. And so that's who the other main character, Thessaly, is. But then you have to think,
you started with this.
No, I started with Wren. I
that's
started with this one who's very
interesting.
uncertain. But then I had to think of like, what's the vulnerability for the golden girl, who is Thessaly? And that took a long time. And I kept getting people being like, she needs some vulnerability. She needs some moment. And you have to find like, what is that right thing? So what I have gotten better at over the years is just finding the story generating problem, whether it is for the villain or for, my main characters, where like you just have to give them something where they got some of what they wanted, but not all, or they got it a no, but, or they got some of what they wanted, but from the wrong person or whatever. And then you've got some imbalance to work with and move forward. The problem is when you just go, the question is yes or no, and the person goes no, and we're like, now your story's done, you know. So yeah.
Did either one of you hit a block? Were you taking it just so far, and all of a sudden it was kind of like, you can probably do that in writing your music, but I'm just curious how you fight your way through that.
Yes, that happens to me all the time. I usually end up going back to what was the last thing that I wrote that I felt really right about, you know, in that story, where I was like, a moment where I really know that those characters are behaving in a way that feels right and things felt alive and they felt vital. And then you look at that and go, okay, so how are they feeling at the end of that action, and what are they going to do with it? If I forget about cause and effect, then that's when I wind up with these sort of dead scenes where it's just sort of like people are just exchanging banter and they're not doing anything and nothing is reacting. But if I have to go back to what has to happen now because of what happened there, then I can figure out at least, and I'm always somebody who feels like I'm digging my way out of prison with a spoon, you know, I'm like, I'm just sort of like, all right, I've got that one scene, that's all I've got, but that you can do it scene by scene if you're paying attention to what took you from there. How about you?
Oh, I definitely had it. Once she gets to Oxford, it's like, now what? Like, oh, I'm living in this guy's house. What do I do? And it just felt so episodic. It was like the mucky middle, like, what is her predicament? What, she's just there. It can't be all good. Yeah, it was so difficult.
Yeah.
That was the hardest part. Yeah.
Also,
Until she starts trying to, fit in with these.
Yeah, then you've got a path to follow.
All the professors and all the snooty professors, and she's a fish out of water, and she's got this other ticking clock, which is her career, and this concert that looks like going to happen that stresses her out. And so then it started to come together. But that was the hardest part of the whole book. For sure. Yeah.
Also, the occasional time jump is very helpful. There are times when you're like, oh, now I have to write about how they do this and they do that. And you're so bored already just thinking of how, now they have to like go to the grocery store. And you're like, you know what? 10 years later, how about that? And there's something about that really is, it's like kind of thrilling. Do it.
Take that.
Yeah.
That's good. That would have been helpful if I
wouldn't that have been nice?
Realized, I could just jump forward.
Yeah, which I had never really done much until this book. And suddenly you're just like, just do it. Just try it. Yeah. Because we're not in a band. I don't have to justify this to anybody. Yeah. Anything else?
Now that the book is done and you're sitting so intimately with the characters, you're thinking back on them. Have any songs? Like, have you thought, I could write a song about that character?
Well, I've been wanting to write the song that Jane sings eventually. I've been wanting to write those songs, and I'm so fearful that I can't. Like, I have such writer's block after writing a novel, weirdly. Margie thinks it's so strange, but it's true.
Did you ever have writer's block as a songwriter before?
See, Margie thinks they're all hiding in there.
Okay.
And they probably are. And we just have to go with a Sharpie or like a highlighter pen and go that. I think that you're right, but I'm more afraid to try to write those songs than I am to try to do the second book, this other book that I've started.
Why? Were you afraid? Did you have that same feeling writing songs before?
I've always had that feeling writing songs. I've always felt like melodies come to me, but when it comes down to boiling down a meaningful idea into these lyrics that have to be so precise, because you have to account for meter and rhythm and rhyme, that it's like a haiku you're trying to, or like a puzzle. Yeah. Whereas the book, I felt this flowing energy, almost a drunken feeling when I was writing. I was like just flowing with it. So I'm very honestly more intimidated to try to write lyrics, but I need to do it. Yeah. I need to do it. Okay.
So I'm just curious how you ended up deciding on the titles. Is it something that you can really overthink? Is it something decided early on? Were there alternatives? Of course, like the beautiful Beatles song, which becomes a metaphor for Jane. It's so great. So I'm just curious. It seems like something so simple, but I'm just curious. It's more of a struggle.
You go.
I feel like
this was a very interesting question.
If I don't, I either know the title right away and it never changes, or it is horrible and I struggle for a really long time. And so for this one, it was kind of a long struggle. And what did I have before? I I used Bottle Shock for a while was a working title. There's a book, there's a movie called Bottle Shock, but the book doesn't feel like Bottle Shock. So, and then I looked at all these wine terms, and I thought maybe it'd be that. And then I looked at, there's a really wonderful phrase called the angel's share, which is, and it was the title for a while, then we took it out because we thought it sounded religious, and we were like, well, that's kind of misleading. But it's where when you have alcohol or wine or whiskey in a barrel, and then invariably some of it evaporates, and they say that's the angel's share. So the epigraph that opens the book is from a wine writer named Terry Thies, where it says, "There's a secret we wine people know, and it is that everybody else hates us." And so we ended up going back with Wine People because and that was just a working title for a long time. We're like, yeah, maybe. And then it ended up being like the right title, even though at first it seemed like not very interesting to me. But there are times when you're like, just tell people what it is, and that ended up really conveying what I wanted. How about you?
Oh,
Thank you.
I didn't have a title for years, and sometimes I would just put the name Jane Stark because that's the protagonist's name. But I was thinking about, I had watched this Hemingway documentary, and I had always loved titles like For Whom the Bell Tolls and what's the other one? The Sun Also Rises. I always loved those titles because they felt like a line of a poem or something, and I just thought that there was a mystery to those titles, and I had it came into my mind, and I wrote on a Post-it, "This bird has flown." Obviously, it comes from Norwegian Wood, but all the chapter titles, or 90% of them, are based on song titles. So, and I knew the character's a musician. There were so many ways that, having pulled that phrase from the Beatles song, because it's Norwegian Wood, "This bird has flown." I've always really had an affinity for birds, for the idea of her freeing herself from her one-hit wonderness in her case, and her feeling that she can never, get back on track for a number of reasons. And I just had it on this Post-it, and then finally the manuscript still said like Jane Stark on it, or and I got up the courage and I said, I had this idea. I know I really have to tell them what the title of the book is. And I said, what do you think of "This Bird Has Flown"? And there was this sort of pause, and this was me asking Jay, and he's like, oh, I really like it. And the same thing happened when I called Sarah, our agent, the next day. I pitched it, and she had the same thing, and it was like, that was it. Jay and Sarah liked it, and I knew I liked it, and then we never looked back.
Yeah.
And I still have that Post-it now. Yeah. It was just,
It's such a relief when you feel like, oh, that's it, when you just know that it's right and you're not wondering.
But I did feel nervous asking both Jay and Sarah, but they both had almost this exact same reaction.
Yeah.
Like this pause, and then, so we never looked back. That's it. Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
So this is a two-part question. How long did it take you to write the book, Susanna?
Okay.
And the second would be, had you started, so people go to read them stuff, had you guys ever started a book that you've never finished?
Yes.
I have.
Yeah.
Like in 1989, it's in 2 spiral notebooks. That's right. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I had the beginning of something, probably 50 pages, and that is one of those weird things where I was so excited and I just loved it, and then something just sort of fizzled, it just wasn't coming together. And I'll take a lot of that stuff and I know I'll use it in something else. Like the essential things that interest me about that still interest me. But at the time it's a horrible, I felt it crumple up, I swear to God, I felt the moment when I was like, there it went. And it was a real bummer, but it does happen sometimes. And those are the weird parts. I'm not a very mystical kind of person, but there are times when you're like, that was sort of out of my control. And it's just whatever your brain is doing, but it's kind of a fascinating process that just does that sometimes. Yeah.
Oh, how long did it take? Oh, well, I wasn't able to work on it. I would say about, about 4 years, maybe.
Mhm.
Also, well, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
about 4 years, and then editorial process at a
Mhm.
little bit. Yeah, it took me a long time to let anyone look at it.
Yeah.
You know, it was a very personal, private, secret, not secret, but like just a sudden left turn in my life
Yeah.
where I became totally fixated on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, well, there is one more. Let's just do one more.
When your novel gets turned into a movie, you do the soundtrack. Will that make it musical?
Yes, it will. Hopefully that. So yes, if the writer's strike is on, but luckily I was able to write the. I was hired to write the screenplay, and I did turn it into Universal, and then now everything is on hold.
Yeah.
But eventually things will. Hopefully the studio bosses will wise up.
Yeah.
I don't want to get political here, but
Yeah.
you know, and pay the working screenwriters what they deserve.
Yeah.
Yes. So anyway,
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. All right. Thank you. Thank you. There's so much more to talk about couples.